Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. As Molly has made clear, there's many reasons for me to be excited to speak to you. I'm thrilled to be at my alma mater, and even more so to be talking about design for children because it has numerous connections to the design, research, writing, and criticism department. First of all, it wouldn't have happened without the support of the program chair, Molly. And secondly, as she mentioned, Alex Klimowski, Lila Allen, Lauren Palmer, and Emma Ng, all of whom are alums of the program, were research and writing assistants for the book. So it's something dear to my heart and to many here at the program. As Molly also mentioned, it came directly out of my thesis research. When I was here doing thesis research and thinking about design environments for children, I got really interested in these spaces because I had grown up in a smaller city. I grew up in a house with a yard, and as I was walking around the city, I started thinking that a lot of New York City children grow up in apartments, and if they're playing outside, their outside environments probably look like this. And what does that do to the way that they see the world and their place within it? So from that, it wasn't a large leap to get to the objects and toys that would make up their internal environments or interior environments. And so it kind of felt like a really nice dovetailing of the work that I did here at the program. So looking at the 20th century, it's really a time of unprecedented thinking about childhood. And we rarely question our notion of childhood as a time of innocence and playful exploration, but really it's actually a pretty modern concept. For the vast majority of our history, children were regarded as incomplete adults. And it's really not until the 18th and 19th centuries that we thought that childhood should actually be treated as an independent phase of life. So the 20th century, as I said, saw unprecedented interest in childhood and was dubbed the century of the child by the Swedish social theorist Ellen Key. This was mostly because improvements in child labor laws in sort of the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, gave children much more time to play. And also the rise of industrialization and urbanization and consumerism saw us thinking about the modern child, their place in society and in this modern city in new ways. So whether it was sparked by the beginning of a new century or the end of a world war, children repeatedly served as a source of social and aesthetic renewal throughout the century and as model citizens of tomorrow. There were aesthetic, material, and technical innovations in design for children that were remarkable and closely paralleled and at times directly influenced other areas of visual culture. Nevertheless, children's design has remained historically under-recognized. And that's likely, I think, because we live in a very work-centric culture, and things that are deemed to be first and foremost playful are considered to be less important. And also, I think historically, the realm of children has been seen as the more sort of domestic and potentially female sphere. So one other thing about when we think about design for children is that we also often bring a strong sense of nostalgia to the objects of our childhood, which kind of gets in the way of a more dispassionate or rigorous analysis. You may have fond memories of time spent playing with a Slinky, or a Radio Flyer Red Wagon, or perhaps like me, My Little Ponies. Sometimes it's hard to look back at our beloved toys and see that while the ponies may have been onto something with their slogan, "Friendship is magic," they were in the end quite hideous bits of plastic. So it may not be My Little Pony anymore, but there is no shortage of hideous bits of plastic being marketed to children today. Indeed, over the last century, children have gone from being on the assembly line to being manipulated to obsessively want what comes off of the assembly line. The emergence of children's furniture as as designer objects can be traced back to the Austrian bentwood furniture company Tonnet of the Viennese cafe chair that we all know, which began advertising mass-produced designs for children in 1866. While they've often remained downplayed, a look at design history reveals that many of the century's pioneering designers actually created many things for children. So while he's best known for the red and blue chair, Gerrit Rietveld was a father of 6 children, and he also designed some of the 20th century's most iconic pieces for kids, with their combination of strong geometric forms, bold colors, and design-forward function. Rietveld's designs were deemed visionary by mid-century, by the mid-century population. The French designer Jean Prouve is credited with introducing the machine age and the streamlined aesthetic to European interiors. Prouve drew inspiration from new technologies of the day, namely within the automotive and aeronautical industries, often imbuing his objects with a futuristic look. Trained as a metalsmith, Prouve's intimate knowledge of the material remained the foundation of his career and work. This desk is one of a number of designs he created for children, and it's made in the post-war years when devastation in Europe, rising child birth rates, and a shortage of materials meant that there had to be a new sense of collaboration and creativity in the building of schools. So we see here that his design is very economical and also pioneering. So for most design enthusiasts, Marcel Breuer's name conjures images of tubular steel furniture. Breuer also created several designs for children, including tubular steel chairs, but he began with this one. It's a wooden chair that he created when he was a student at the Bauhaus, and you can actually see the influence of Rietveld, who visited this school and in the same year that he designed this chair. So aside from getting a new perspective on familiar designers, one of the really lovely bits of researching design for children in the course of writing the book was discovering all of these wonderfully talented designers who are less well known, but I believe deserve greater recognition. And this is one of them. Frieden Schaper is a graphic designer by training. He's British, and he was initially inspired to design for his own children and began producing toys with the help of his wife out of his house. Schaper's aesthetic and talent meant that he collaborated with a whole bunch of wonderful manufacturers and created toys from the 1960s to the 1980s that had a sophisticated taste and sort of things like puzzles, books, a whole range of things that continue to stand out to this day. Nana Ditzel is a Danish cabinet maker by training, and you can really see that her sort of training in the subtle solutions and the striking details that she brings to her work. Each of her creations was also made in close collaboration and analysis of her the habits of her children, so they're really functional objects. And she has been deemed the first lady of Danish furniture design, not only for her things for children, but for adults as well. She has a prolific and diverse body of work, and that's established her as one of the most imaginative, versatile, and remarkable women of modern design. And lastly, Patrick Rylands became a staple, or his toys became a staple of British children's bathtubs for over 30 years. He designed from the 60s to the 80s, and he was trained as a ceramicist at the Royal College of Art, where he combined his love of sculptural forms with the smooth materiality of plastic. So you can actually see he didn't only design in plastic, he also designed in wood and a number of other materials, but he really sought to create toys that gave children a sense of agency and really helped them use their imagination to create their own worlds. And my favorite, Libouche Niklova, she was an important figure in the world of modern Czech design due to her collaboration with a plastics company called Fatra. And this was when plastic was a really new material. She produced some of the first mass-produced toys in the country, and her pioneering creations were colorful, washable, affordable, and helped transform the public perception of children's toys, which at that time were really mostly made of wood and by hand, so in limited numbers. In 1971, she predicted, quote, "Increasingly natural materials will be a luxury and the object of admiration. The future, however, belongs to plastic." So her toys were immensely popular in their day, have since been celebrated in museums around the world, and are some of the, to me, the most lively in the book. So one of the other things that I think is really interesting if you look at the history of design for children is that often the historical narrative of design and the new materials that we use can be seen first appearing in designed products for kids. And that's really because at their smaller scale, it allowed designers the ability to experiment and see how these new materials functioned. So, case in point, this child's chair and stool was the first mass-produced bent wood furniture item produced by Charles and Ray Eames, who would come to be known, of course, for their bent plywood lounge chairs. And it was done in 1944. The run was 5,000. And so it really allowed them to test out at a smaller scale what became such an iconic piece of furniture for so many of us in the adult size. This chair also revolutionized design in 1964. After 4 years of technological studies, two designers, Marco Zanusso and Richard Sapper, collaborated with Cartel to produce the first piece of furniture made entirely from injection molded plastic. It is one of the early designs responsible for convincing people that plastic was an appropriate material for the modern home. So it's lightweight, it's stable, it's durable, which is all perfect for kids' design. And you can see that the legs allowed it to be stacked like building blocks. So it was both playful and functional. The Ozu 700 desk by the celebrated French designer Marc Berthier has the pop style of its decade, and it is also part of the designer's revolutionary line for Roche-Beaubois, which was the first collection of furniture made entirely of polyester and fiberglass. So there are many themes that can be drawn out in Design for Children, but basically through the book, it seeks to show that thoughtful design for children is open-ended, adaptable, and addresses children's age-appropriate needs. And this is one of the best examples. It's the Trip Trap chair by Peter Opsvik. It's become kind of a classic of Scandinavian design, and its genius lies in its adaptability. The seat height and footrest can be adjusted to 14 different positions, so it really can be used comfortably from infancy through to adulthood. And it allows children of any age to basically sit at the same height as an adult, so that they can feel like they're looking straight at an adult rather than up at them. Also, the footrest for older children allows them to get in and out by themselves. This is the Schaukelwagen, or the rocking car. It's a classic design of Eastern Germany and was in many kindergartens at the time that it was made. As you can see, it's also adaptable. It exemplifies how successful children's design is open-ended rather than prescriptive. And rather than simply scale down adult designs, that exceptional design for children has a variety of uses and encourages kids to create their own worlds. So this, if it's maybe difficult to tell, but it can be a rocking chair when it's faced that way, and if you flip it over, it can be a little pedal car for kids. And the Zocker by Luigi Colani, who is best known for his racing car designs for companies like Alfa Romeo, Fiat, and BMW. This is another example of highly adaptable design. He created a chair that could be sat on forwards or backwards. Its back can become a little desk. And it can be anything that a kid wants. They can see it as an animal, they can see it as a cockpit, they can see it as a car. It's made out of polyurethane, which is the first time that polyurethane was used. This type of plastic was used in furniture design, and it's lightweight, easy to clean. So a number of things that make it really good for kids. So that's just a brief overview, but I'm really excited to be here with Lora Appleton today, who received a wonderful intro from Molly. I will say that it's just wonderful to have her perspective. She's been in the field for years. She can speak as a mother, as a collector, as an entrepreneur, and as an advocate for the field. And I'm really grateful to have her to help draw out some of the other exciting topics around design for children.
So I'm Lila. I'm from Metropolis magazine and managing editor there, and I'm really happy to I'm really happy to be here with all of you because, funny enough, Kim and I actually, I don't think met at Crit, even though that is how we know each other. Yeah. We met because after I graduated, I was basically sitting on a thesis and had no idea what to do with it. And I contacted Kim because I knew she had also, I wrote my thesis about design for children. I wrote about interiors and toy design. So Kim, having been down the road of writing about design for children as well, we had coffee together and I said, do you have any idea anybody who would publish this? Like it's so hard to find good design criticism about children's toys, children's design. And she recommended Kinder Journal. So it was actually Kinder Journal that initially kind of brought us together, and I did end up publishing through them, which was great. So I'm just curious, like, this book came out this fall. Alexander Lang had a really great book about children's design come out this fall. The Walker had an exhibition about design for children. Do you see design for children as having a moment right now? And if so,
sorry,
it's okay.
Okay, here we go.
Good?
Okay.
Should I repeat the question?
No.
Okay, to repeat it all. Yeah. So all of these events are happening right now. Books are coming out, exhibitions are happening. You are putting out amazing products for children as well. Do you see this as having a moment right now? And if so, why is that?
I absolutely think design for children is having more than a moment. I think there's a lot of things that are coming together to make this a hot topic, if you will. First and foremost, there's a level of attention being paid to handcrafted and incredibly well-manufactured goods. And as you saw, or heard rather, Kim talking about all of the firsts, first types of plastic, first types of polyurethane. So there's this incredible design history that once people get the tiniest bit of information, you catch the bug. It's a very exciting thing. I also think we've been shining a light in this subject for some time, right around the time of Century for the Child, which was at MoMA, which was an amazing exhibition on the last 100 years. And we launched Kindermodern about 6 months prior to that. So I've seen quite a build and a wave starting to really grow. I think also we're engaging furniture designers to think about what they're making and who they're making it for and the age groups that it involves. So I think the design programs from an educational perspective are opening that up. I'm seeing a lot more people focus their work on this age group and on toys and small objects for children. So yeah, I think there's interest all around.
Kim, did you have anything to?
I mean, I think Lora can speak to it in such more depth than I can, but I think also as we're seeing just trends of parents or people waiting longer to have children. They generally have more disposable income. They're more interested in investing in things that are going to be, wonderfully made, beautiful toys that they won't just discard over time. And they're also just more thoughtful about what they're giving their children that shapes them from an early age.
And how they're educating their children, which I think is a real, has been a turning point as parents and educational institutions are growing beyond traditional education into independent schooling and different modes of education. It's opening parents up to thinking about children being autonomous and using their environment in different ways, and that bleeds into incredibly thoughtful design in the home and in the classroom.
Right, which actually leads us to a good talking point. So when you're designing for children, I can say from firsthand experience, having written about it myself, it is incredibly political once you get into it, because everyone has an opinion. Everyone has either been a child or has a child. And I do not have children. I'm curious, first of all, Lora, you have a child.
I do.
And I think you got into this business after.
Because of him.
Yes. And Alexander Lang, I know, is the same way. How did that change your approach to design? Either, in the practice of design, but also in how you evaluate it? And how has it changed the way, basically the way you consider it?
I don't think before I had children, I had any idea about children, how they functioned. So being a mom, and I say that in a very non-judgmental way, by the way, but just watching them and seeing how they interact in a room from infancy and as they begin to explore the world around them. And I was not working at the time and desperate to work at the time and really needed to be creative. And so like a lot of creative moms, we throw it all into the parenting. And the reason that I mention that is I immediately started to develop a lot of methodologies and ideas about design for children before I even dug in myself. And I just really started to notice that my son Willem, who's 9 now, used furniture in completely different ways than we as grown-ups use furniture. And the way they torque their bodies around things and roll on the floor with things and think about things was so unique and was really catchy. I was fascinated and engaged and excited about thinking about that and what did that mean for the way we use our space, and how can furniture and objects live and function differently in the space than we've been doing them before. If we present education differently, if we're expected, as teenagers, let's say, are using their environment in different ways. They're on the phone, they're lounging, they're not at a desk being told to produce things all the same way. So our whole societal look at children, family, and education has shifted. And so I think that the physical world is catching up to that.
Definitely. And I think actually the Luigi Colani stool that we just looked at is a great example of that, because it can be flipped around, used a bunch of different ways. And actually Vitra put out a stool this last year that is quite similar, called the Stool Tool, that can be flipped around and used in different ways, made out of plastic, goes outside. And I think that I saw people interacting with the stool in the same way. It's kind of like a playful approach, and I think that there's something to be learned there. Do you think that there are other lessons that designers of products for adults or for the general public can learn from design for kids?
Yeah, I would say that I think that just the very sense of the adaptability of things for children. Obviously they have to really think about what a child is able to lift, but so that sort of thing I think is different when you get to adults. But I think in terms of creating pieces that can function in a number of different ways, that's something that I think most adults would really like, especially as spaces get smaller, and something that is multifunctional would be really great.
Right, and there's also an understanding that the user is going to change over time, which I think is interesting, especially as we're thinking about populations aging and the way that people are going to be interacting with their products moving forward. I mean, maybe that's something that we should be thinking about more, is how we're going to change as users and how we should build that into the products themselves and make them adaptable.
I think this is already happening a little bit. I think I've been thinking a lot about how family structures are extremely different, age groups, how we're living in families, gender shifts, like all of this really creates a different landscape for the physical use of this space and of the rooms in the home. I think in the past, it was always adults were seen, children were not heard, which meant that all of the things that pertained to the younger child was always hidden or behind or in a child's space, delegated space. I think and part of this might just be affordability and size of apartments and urban living that also contributes to that. But how we're living with children is very differently now. They are everywhere. We do want to be able to live beautifully. I think there's a myth that you can't live with beautiful things if you have kids. And so just all those ideas as they start to shift are impacting furniture designers like myself who are budding furniture designers, and then long-term designers and architects who've been working on these pieces since the beginning of design. I mean, I think what's funny is nothing's really new, right? The Luigi Colani piece, these concepts just over and over, and it's the time and the materials that give it a different lens. And I think that's really exciting, though, because we have the ability to look at it differently with the past and the future ahead of us.
What about kids as design critics?
Hardest design critics.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who doesn't have a child, I'm kind of limited in my exposure to it, but my impression, I'm married to a pre-K teacher. And there have been lots of examples of toys that I thought were fantastic, and I would present to him, and he's like, kids would never play with this. So, and actually, this was something that we ran into in editing the book as well. There are a million amazing, beautiful objects that I would love to have on my desk, or that Kim would have in her apartment. But after close examination would kind of reveal itself to not actually be designed for a child, but adult. Yes. Can you speak a little bit to your encounters with that and kind of the editing process maybe that you went through?
That was definitely one of the challenges of the book, because I also don't have children. So one of the themes that you really saw in the book is how many of the designers designed the product when they had children for the first time, and they were thinking that there was a gap in the market, they couldn't find what they wanted. So it really, I think, is a hard thing to figure out. Like you, there were a number of things that I was like, oh my God, it's beautiful. And children wouldn't be that interested in it. So I think trying to find that balance of like, yes, I find it aesthetically pleasing, and a kid is going to be interested in it because it doesn't reveal itself too quickly. It can be it can be seen or imagined to be many different things, is the hard balance to find. But
that's hitting it right on the head, in my opinion, is with children, there's a lot of child-led learning because it works. And it's really important that you engage a child at their level. And you talked about that, whether it's literal and physical and it's eye level, or it's drawing them out with interest. And the things that typically do that is shape and form and material and use. One of the things that's been the most exciting for me to see is as I've collaborated with other designers all over the world, and we've used different materials. We did a really awesome collaboration with Chen and Kai, and they worked on these homosote pieces. And my son, after seeing them walking down the street, there was scaffolding with homosote on the outside. And he was like, isn't that like Chen's chair? And I think he was 4. And I was actually no, he was a little bit older, 5. But I was so impressed that he made that connection all on his own. And it really became something that I started to fold in to the work of not to just come up with a funky material, but to think about, and we're when I'm thinking about designing for children, I'm not so much trying to engage, I'm trying to support function. And that tends to help when you're dealing with furniture. Object and toy is a different bag altogether, I've found.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and if toys are also kind of little crystallized versions of our values as a culture, because this is what we're using to help instruct the next generation, to help them learn how to use their hands, learn how to connect sound with movement, all of these different things. How do you think, can you think of any examples in the book where values were really inscribed into an object or kind of embody the time that they were made in that way? Or maybe an object that didn't make the book,
Right.
because it was so disastrous in this regard, or
Right. I think for the most part, the things that we didn't choose any technological toys. There's no video games. There's nothing of that in the book. And I think there was a sense that we wanted to really choose things that did feel somewhat timeless, and that technology isn't per se bad, but it's changing very quickly, and it doesn't lend itself often to be visual in a book form. But I mean, there were definitely things in the research process that were just entertaining from a fail standpoint. There was one in particular that was an atomic lab experiment kit that was actually quite popular in the time, but had radioactive material in it. So things like of that nature, you're just like, how did that get out into the world? And obviously of its time.
right.
But yeah.
The thing that came to my mind first was the use of ply material in the early designs. The world was very concerned with hygienic properties when it came to children's design, specifically in educational facilities. And those same designers, the architects, were designing for those spaces and were also having children. And so there was a lot of overlap in their own practice as well as their commissioned educational works. So I would say the use of bent ply was a real novel material that instigated kind of a movement of hygienic design.
Right. And I just have one more question. Alex, are you going to?
Yeah, so I think that I would love.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love both of you maybe to have a couple of thoughts on what it was like to research children's design, your involvement in the project, and Alex, I know if you want to talk about a certain object, I'm happy to have an image.
Great. And actually, you can be involved in this last question too, because I think this applies to you. I'm very interested to know if you think that working with design for children, developing it, selling it, collecting it, writing about it, is this a feminist act? And if so, what makes it that way, and what compels you to pursue this kind of work?
I guess that one's for me.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that living for me is a feminist act, so this is not site-specific. I am very proud to be a mother and am excited to share the pride of that with anyone, because I think there's what I learned through going into this business. It's not everybody's as excited about children and the growth of children and their happiness as I am. And I get it. Like, if you're into kids, you're into kids. And if you're not, you're not. But there really is these are pearls of incredible design and history here that relates to everything. I think it's really, you don't have to be a woman to have a child or to be interested in children. And so I think it really is for everyone. But I'd like to think that the more we can focus positivity on raising small people up, that is also an act of feminism, of raising healthy, morally inclined and ethical beings.
I think also just from the standpoint of the number of female designers that you come across, I mean, Nana Ditzel and Libouche Niklova were two that I talked about tonight in at length, but there's more of a wealth of female designers in designing for in the realm of design for children that I think in that way it's really lovely to bring attention to the beautiful work that they've done.
Right. Excellent. Alex, did you want to talk about research process, objects that?
Just stand up at the podium and just like advance
Yeah.
the slide.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so, well, just to give you guys an introduction, I write mostly about architecture. So when Kim approached me to work on this project, I thought it would be a great opportunity to sort of get outside of my comfort zone and explore this whole different realm of design, which I did. And the series in Classroom Chair is one of the objects that I researched. And I don't know, it's, you've probably seen it. It's quite ubiquitous. I believe it was the first ever mass-produced plastic molded chair designed by a British designer named Robin Day, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So the research process, it was definitely eye-opening for me. I never spend time around children at all. There are no children in my family, so I spend no time around them. So it was very interesting to learn about the ways in which designers are thinking about how to design certain objects for children, for their cognitive growth, for their physical growth, and all of these things. So yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and I mean, if I had to pick a favorite toy, it's really hard because there are so many great ones. Kim actually showed a few of them as well. I have to say the one that kind of sticks out in my memory is, I don't know if you all know what the Isetta bubble car was.
Yeah.
This is actually an example, not necessarily of design for children, but more of like a shrinky-dinked adult one. But it brought my attention to this tiny, tiny version of the Isetta bubble car that was made for kids. And to give you an idea of it, I think it's about the size of this table. And you enter through the front of the car. And we found that there were like 5 examples or something of this toy, or of this car made at a mini scale that had ended up in various car museums. And anyway, it was just kind of a really specific moment in time that this was a good idea. And of course I loved Luigi Colani. The Labyrinth toy, which is that wooden box you've probably seen 1,000 times, where you balance the marble and it goes down the maze and then eventually falls down the hole. It was just super interesting to read about the history of some of these things, that was actually used as a rehabilitation toy for fighter pilots after World War II. Once again, like working on the hand-eye coordination, working on cognitive development, physical rehabilitation or physical development. It's just really fascinating how all these things kind of crystallize into these objects. And I think that's what makes it one of the many reasons that design for children is very compelling. I think we should just open to questions from the audience, if there are any. Yes?
Hi. Thank you, first of all, for a really wonderful conversation and presentation. I'm excited to buy the book this holiday season, not for anybody else, but for me. I work in the early education field, and we do a lot of work at the agency with home-based childcare programs. And there's a lot of focus right now on toys that facilitate engagement with adults and interaction both with other children and also with the outside world. I was wondering if and there are a lot of different prescribed toys from city agencies and such for these purposes. Are there any really beautiful instances of that sort of, are there any objects that really stand out from your research and from your writing that are meant to facilitate interaction with the outside world and with others?
So for the microphone, she was asking if she works in the childcare field, and there's a big emphasis right now on toys that facilitate relationship between children and the outside world, children and adults, children and other children, kind of relationship building toys in a certain way, or and she asked if there are any examples of that in the book. I'll let you all answer that. I have one in mind, but we'll go. Start it off. Yeah. And it actually is the product of someone who spoke here at Decred a few years ago, Cass Holman's Rigamajig.
Yeah, that would be.
And Cass Holman had worked at Rockwell Group during the development of the Imagination Playground, which are those blue blocks you've probably seen like South Street Seaport, these big foam blocks that are basically like a movable playground that are large, lightweight, waterproof. And you build these big constructions out of them. But what Cass did that was super interesting was that she used objects that were heavy and that required a team effort to lift up, to put together, that actually had a little bit more physical risk. If it collapsed, it actually could fall and bruise your leg or whatever. And that's one example certainly that sticks out of, and this was actually, I think, I'm not sure if it still is, but it was in use on the High Line for a long time, and she's released a domestic version as well that's smaller scale. But especially in the larger scale, which was huge planks of wood and metal pulleys and things like that, that's one that definitely sticks out in my mind.
I don't know that we saw a ton of that because of the developmental stages that hit with early childhood, with the pre-primary. There's a lot of singular play before parallel play, which is still solo play, before interactive cross-cultural play, if you will. And so I think that things started a little bit later based on age and then also some technology. And just a contemporary product that I would look at, which I don't think made the book, but is really interesting in this, is Feltro. It's out of Canada, and it's a felt and magnetic-based build product that are shapes that can build knights and swords and big functional, and they're forts, that was the word I was looking for. And that's being used in a lot of libraries for that exact reason.
Yeah. Yes.
What I encountered in one playground a number of years ago, the standard design for swings in a playground, a park playground, would be to have about 4 of them all horizontal, facing the same way. And this design was where there were the 4 swings, but they faced inward so that as the kids would swing, they could talk to each other.
Oh my gosh.
It's wow. What a great redesign. So is there anything that maybe you've encountered, something that someone tweaked like that? And might I also mention that having been to the Maker Faire in Queens, which is located by the Hall of Science, that outside of the Hall of Science, they have a playground out there that has items there that are not common. They've cranked out all the kind of things that you've been talking about and made it a very exciting place. So.
I would say, I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but one of the objects in the book that caught my eye particularly is called the Free Universal Construction Kit. And it is basically created by a father who is a computer programmer and was watching his son, who had Brickle blocks and Lincoln Logs and Tinker Toys and Legos, and he was trying to fit all of the different parts together and was annoyed that he couldn't. And so the father created a series of 80 different connectors, which can be 3D printed, and then you can basically connect all the different kinds of building materials.
Strawbees also is the same method, but with connector points in plastic that connect straws to build all types of kinetic.
There was an angle about what you're describing that the toy manufacturers did not like that.
Right, because
And
it's
so
trademarked.
what he did as the next step is that instead of producing them himself,
You just download the open source. Exactly.
So that other people could just go ahead
Exactly.
and do it.
Yeah, so it gets around the high trademark costs of
Packing
producing it.
toys.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Tucker.
So, I love this kind of design stuff, and played with it when I was a kid and all that stuff. But hasn't the sort of this design style become like a icon of elitist culture, and like underprivileged people don't want to get near this stuff because it's going to get their kids thinking the wrong way?
I'd love to jump on that
So
one.
is this sort of design
Elitism.
elitist is the question.
Yeah.
I think it can be definitely interpreted as elitist. I think there are incredible iconic designs from this period. As one-of-a-kind or few-of-a-kind items, they are very expensive or can be expensive to source quality usable or museum-type pieces. But I think overall, design for children should be accessible, and that's the point of Kinder Modern, is helping to educate basic design principles and then how we choose to use them in our life. So even just the basics of original design versus reissued design versus copied and stolen and plagiarized design. And so those themes sort of relate into what you're talking about. I think the general public or the consumer is just not knowledgeable about this niche, and this feels very different from what we're used to. Children are brought up in a disposable, or have been in a disposable culture in the last 30, 40 years, where if it's not cheap and cheerful and out the door in 2 or 3 years, then we don't consider it for our children. So again, I think it's a little bit of a pivot of shifting of how we think about this. I found on the contemporary side, the challenge is there to make items that are crafted well, manufactured properly and safely, and still cost effective. And I think that IKEA is managing to do it, and so are a few other brands, with a lot of issues tied upon it. And so I'm having that challenge every day, both in changing the minds or opening the minds of parents, consumers, etc., all the way to opening myself up and not being a design snob and thinking about design product in different price categories and really looking at the function and what something is made for and about and how, rather than, oh, that's super sexy, I can only get it here, I want to sell that under my gallery, etc. So I think there's a little bit of both and some truth in what you're saying.
Yes, Alex.
So I used to work at an architecture firm, Datner Architects, and Richard Datner actually designed the adventure playground in Central Park, which would definitely not be built today, considering that it had all of these what were considered dangerous components. It would just be a huge liability for parents. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that aspect of danger in design for children, and how we lost something with all of this maybe over concern for children's safety.
Yeah, I think.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
again for the mic, sorry. So she worked for Richard Datner, who was the architect of the Adventure Playground, which you might have seen at Central Park. It has the giant ziggurat and would not be built today. And so this brings up the question of risk, and if we've lost something by kind of giving up risk in such a litigious design culture.
I think definitely. I mean, firstly, it's easy to say this when I don't have a child of my own, but I think a large part of my thesis research was about the fact that because we've become so risk averse and litigious, a lot of the playgrounds now become exactly the same equipment, and that children get bored. That if you give them a really safe environment, they will actually, in some ways, try and make it exciting and hurt themselves because they're throwing themselves off of something just to try and make it fun. Whereas if you look at the adventure playgrounds, if you look at what were also called adventure playgrounds in Europe, or created in England at the time, right after the end of World War II, when they had all these bombed out building sites, that they just let children go in and scramble around, and they had people sort of there making sure they weren't, rusty nails in the hands, but they were giving them the opportunity to really test their limits. So I think there's definitely a happy medium to be found between making sure that a child isn't going to harm themselves seriously, but also giving them a sense of like a little bit of danger so that they learn the boundaries.
I would also just say that our idea of what's dangerous is also constantly changing. It could be that you were given an object, when I got like my hand-me-downs from my mom, like her toys from when she was a kid that are covered in some kind of like lead paint or something, or something might be made of a material or have a certain design that we now know can be correlated to SIDS. There's always going to be some element of risk that I think we're picking up on later, but definitely I would love to see more of it come back. But again, I think it's much easier said than said when I don't have a child. Maybe the person with a child should.
I just gave my son a knife, so I'm not I'm the best judge, and it was a real I tortured over this for a while because he's been, he wants to whittle and he's really been asking. And so for us, it's really a sense, again, of engaging that autonomy and learning respect and learning the boundaries. Kids are always testing their space. We started at an independent school that had shop class for 3-year-olds, and it's why we went to that school. I saw these little kids and they had goggles on and they were hammering nails and screwing nails into big tree logs, and I was like, yeah, let's get into that. And it was fascinating that I never saw a kid hurt themselves. Like, they were given the landscape, and then there was these sort of invisible protective walls. And so I've just sort of learned to, like, tiger mom from afar, like I'm in the back, he's not so sure that he's being fussed over, but I'm well aware of the surroundings, and he has a lot of freedom to run and bounce off that. And then you have to continue to pull back and allow them to experiment with danger on their own.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
How about for children with some form of disability? What types of toys? Can you talk about some toys for them?
Sure, they're
such that they could be designed in a way that they could be played with other children as well and play together.
Right, so the question was designed for children with disabilities and also designed where children can play with one another. Both of you, I think, at the same time said Renate Mueller.
Renate, yeah.
And can you just tell the audience a little about Renate Mueller? And
yeah, so she created and still creates these beautiful animals that are created out of burlap. They're quite heavy. They allow children with disability a lot of tactile sensory information. They're sturdy enough that they can take some rough and tumble play. She was born into a family that had a toy factory, but really became interested in creating toys specifically for children with disabilities. And of course, they are also fun for kids without disabilities. But she's one that is featured in the book. And I'm trying to think, I don't know do you know of anything that facilitates? I mean, those actually are good for children with and without disability, but.
I mean, I think there are a lot of similar motor skill toys that do a lot of the same, like hand-eye coordination, etc. Sorters, creative playthings sorters. A lot of the creative playthings entire catalog, actually. Again, anything that leans a little more educational based or institutionalized education tends to focus in that way. There are more and more on the contemporary side as well that are happening. I know person wanted to ask a question.
Sure. And
Hi. My question is about distribution. Thinking about growing up, all the spaces where I would interact with toys would be like a toy store, Toys R Us, KB, FBO Sports, and they're all gone now. So where do you see, besides obviously the classroom and the playground, where do you see children interacting with toys in the future now that it's primarily Amazon, Walmart?
Well, we are seeing Amazon go back offline into more brick and mortar. So I think I don't think I'm 100% clear as to how the landscape of shopping is going to shift offline as well. I think also museum stores and mom and pops are all over the world are still giving the best of what's out there in toy. A lot of Scandinavian countries have some of the best options and have designer toys from all over the world, not just designer expensive, but designer well-made, small batch produced type objects.
Yeah, and I will say, FAO Schwartz is back.
Yeah.
As of like a week ago. Yeah.
And at Terminal B.
Right. Oh, at Georgia.
Yeah. Rockefeller Center. Yeah. But, you know, on a mass market level, that's a really good question because Toys R Us is gone now.
Here's Bye Bye Baby.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there is.
They have like grown-up kids ones, do that?
Yeah.
Grown-up kids
Like
toys.
older kids, I don't know. I'm not a child.
I think that once you get past 10,
Yeah.
children's interests really delve into the virtual world, and things are really shifting in a big way. So you're getting a lot of tech toys that interact with tech and with child. And then you're seeing, again, the reaction that a lot of makers are going back to the handmade, the hand-used, the hand-carved, wooden-oriented toys for simplicity, for nostalgia, for some historical bends, etc.
I just wanted to also add, going back to the last question, sorry, Jamie, about designing for children with disabilities or kind of building out empathetic toys. You actually had one in your gallery recently, and that was the Lucas Massens and Sons.
Oh, yeah.
And you can probably tell the story better than I can, but one of the sons had to, he had like arrhythmia, or you can...
The short of it is Lucas Massen and Sons. Lucas Massen is a Dutch designer who primarily focuses on social design. He's much more interested in the conversation of design and how it's affecting the world around us than commercial design. He started a furniture company with his young boys at the time, who were 7. Twins were 7, the older boy was 9. And they are now 13 and 16, just to give you an idea of how long we've been working with them. And they have done a number of projects with their father, looking at themselves through the development of design. First, they were small 7 and 9-year-olds that were painting the pieces that their father made. They were all hand painted and then signed by each child. The next iteration of that project was looking at the nature-nurture side of growing up through design. Am I the designer? Is my father the designer? And starting to think about that through the production of furnishings and et cetera. And I'm going to fast forward because there were a lot of projects, but most recently we wanted to do a bit of a retrospective. The boys were now grown up enough that they could work on their own collection, and like all of us who are thinking about design or designers, we take our own influence on what's happening into our life, the things we're experiencing, what we want to experiment with, and we're putting that into our work. And it was really fascinating to see that happen with the boys. One of the twins found out that he had a hole in his heart by accident. He literally went to the doctor for a regular checkup and had this pretty massive hole in his heart. And 2 weeks later was in emergency surgery to repair. And the boys put that straight into the work. They used a Teflon material that patched the heart to inspire this series of stress toys to basically share the experience of what their family was going through. They're so close-knit and so wonderfully intertwined as a family and as working designers and budding designers. And so they basically sketched the inner workings of the heart and the lungs and the spleen and the intestines and turned them all into Teflon powder-filled stress toys. And it was really a remarkable experience. I felt so lucky to be able to go through this with them. And Maris turned out more than fine, and they all came for their New York City for the first time for their opening of this show and got to share this experience of how they work with their family in different ways.
Well,
It was a long answer, sorry.
thank you very much. And I think we can.
Thank you.
Yeah.